Okay, let's tackle the next argument, which is Babylon the Great was Jerusalem because the apostles had to be avenged on her. So the way this is going to work is in Revelation 18 it says, "Rejoice over her, you heavens, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her." Well, we have the concept of the avenger of blood from the Old Testament, which is indicative that if somebody has to be avenged on someone, then there was blood shed, which makes us think that the city killed the apostles, actually, and that's why the apostles have to be avenged on her, because the city killed the apostles. So now we're just looking for a city that killed apostles, which harkens back to the last video of a first century context, because we don't have apostles today, or at least I don't believe we do. Maybe you do, but most people don't call themselves apostles. We don't identify people as apostles today. So we're limited to a city in the first century when we had apostles that could actually kill apostles. Let me define for you just real quick what maybe a good theory for who the apostles were, because we have the 12 apostles, of which Judas was one, and one Matthias replaced him. But then we have like Paul calls himself an apostle, and we have Barnabas and Paul being called apostles, and the other James is called an apostle. So we seem to have this larger group also of apostles. But you might remember Jesus Christ chose 12 to be with him, to be his apostles, but then he sent them out 2 by 2, but then you remember he sent out 70 at one time to go and preach. So and I guess 2 by 2, I can't remember, but I would say those are also apostles. They saw the Lord Jesus, they believed the Lord Jesus, and he sent them out to do missionary kind of work. I would say those qualify as apostles in some sense. Somebody pointed this out to me recently, 1 Corinthians 15. I advise you go look this up. This is really neat. It says that he was seen by Cephas, then by the 12. And then a few verses later it says, then he appeared unto James, then to all the apostles. So to me, that's making me think there's two groups in view there. The 12 apostles, and then all the apostles. So you have the 12 and the 70. But anyway, we don't really have a lot of clues as to who all these apostles were. But we have a few there. That's my best guess. There's also the verse in Revelation chapter 2 when he's talking to the Ephesian church, and he says, "You have tested them which say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars." What makes more sense? That there were 12 apostles only, and there were these people claiming to be apostles, or that there were a big group, like maybe 82 or something total apostles, and then there were people claiming to be apostles? So to me, that makes more sense. There was a large group of apostles in the first century, and there were also some false apostles out there claiming that they had seen the Lord Jesus, and John says, "Whoever does evil has not seen him or known him." But John himself says, we saw him, we touched him, we handled the word of life. So he's establishing his apostolic authority. The Apostle Paul, before he became an apostle, he actually saw the Lord Jesus. I'm getting long-winded on this, sorry. So anyway, we know who the apostles are. We maybe have a little bit different opinions about who all the apostles are, and that's okay. But I think we could all agree, hopefully, that the apostles are first century characters, and these holy apostles. And now we just need to find out what city killed apostles. Well, let's talk about the 12 real quick. We have in the book of Acts where Herod takes James and kills him with the sword. And this was during the days of unleavened bread, which makes me think it was in Jerusalem where they would go to keep that feast. And he was wanting to kill Peter after the Passover was over, which again makes me think this is all happening in Jerusalem. And then it mentions about the Iron Gate, a lot of indicators that this is Jerusalem. And it says when there was a persecution because of Saul, in a few chapters earlier, it says that the Christians were scattered everywhere except the apostles. So we have the apostles staying in Jerusalem, and then so that's likely where James was when he lost his head. They tried to kill Peter. So we've got in the book of Acts one of the 12 being killed. They tried to kill 2 of them. Then also in the book of Acts we have the Apostle Paul. They tried to kill the Apostle Paul there. Remember those guys that bound themselves with the oath and everything, that was there in Jerusalem where they were trying to kill him. And it was actually the Romans who had to come and rescue him from the mob that was going to kill him. The Romans rescued Paul from the Jews there in Jerusalem. So we've got a lot of indication from Acts that we don't have a huge sampling of the 12. We just have one, or if you count Peter because they tried to kill him, we got 2 out of the 12 there in Jerusalem. And then as far as the other apostles go, like I said, you have Paul. They tried to kill Paul there. And in the book, in Josephus records the other James, who's also called an apostle, but not one of the 12. He mentions that he was killed in Jerusalem by one of the high priests. People say that, well, we know that Peter was killed in Rome. Well, if we know that, where do we know that from? Is that in the book of Acts? Is that in any of the books of the Bible that Peter was killed in Rome? Did Josephus say that? Did a first century historian say that? Or is that just church tradition hundreds of years later that may or may not be true? I'm going to suggest the latter. So I don't believe that Peter died in Rome. And here's another indicator that Babylon the Great was Jerusalem. If we say Peter was in Jerusalem, where we find him there in the book of Acts, and that's where Jerusalem is kind of the headquarters. That's where they do the council. And Peter's kind of a chief he's one of the 3, you know. It's reasonable that he should be there in Jerusalem. And he writes his letters. How does he sign where he's writing it from? The church which is at Babylon saluteth you. To me, that's an indicator he knows all about Jerusalem being Babylon the Great. And he's going to sign off his letter that way. I'm writing you from Babylon. This city's going down. Anyway, so that's the end of the video. I'll probably think of some other reason or a sub-argument for this. But I think that's enough to give you the idea that the apostles have to be avenged on the city. The Bible identifies Jerusalem as having killed the apostles. Oh, and the Lord Jesus also says, behold, I send you, it says prophets, wise men, scribes. He also says, I send you apostles. I hope that blesses you and establishes, you may not consider that to be concrete proof that Jerusalem is Babylon the Great, but if you just let the evidence lead you to the most likely conclusion, you have to conclude from that piece of evidence that Jerusalem was Babylon the Great. And God bless you. See you later.